Tyr's Hand. Probably not a place that you are unfamiliar with, something that you've definitely seen before, but have you ever seen it done by a priest solo using a technique that could be done as early as level 50? I'm thinking not, and that's why we're going to cover it today. So let's dive into it. So in case you are unaware, Tyr's Hand is a location in Eastern Plaguelands that is filled with elite humanoids in the low to mid level 50 range. It's a popular gold farm due to the fact that the mobs here all drop very good high level items, from BOEs to pots to runecloth or just simply the raw gold that you collect. The difficulty comes in the fact that these mobs are quite challenging to kill, at least for the majority of players that are leveling through the zone. This has resulted in quite a lot of people developing various different techniques for what enables them to be able to farm here effectively. Now, you'll actually see in this footage there is classes who are simply leveled and geared and good for soloing mobs that are here. There's a warlock who comes through every now and then who's not using anything particularly exceptional in terms of a tactic. He's just killing the mobs because he's able to do so with his pet and his gear. And we also have a multi-boxer that features throughout this video as well, that is just here trying to farm up just the same, but doing it more efficiently due to the fact that there are essentially 5 of him. Now, those are all well and good, but they require respectively either the correct class or the correct level of gear, or even maybe 5 accounts if that's the way you want to go. Whereas what we're going to talk about here today is going to only really require that you are a priest and that you are level 50 or above. Now, I do want to stress here that while this is technically possible at level 50, it's probably going to be beneficial to get a little bit higher before you attempt this, because at level 50, if you were to not perform the technique to 100% success rate, you will find yourself dying a lot more often. And that is obviously not ideal. Just to be clear, this is not a farm where dying is absolutely tragic like it is in a lot of cases. The graveyard is relatively nearby, there's usually a safe place to respawn. It's pretty much just going to cost you your buffs and about a minute of time, but obviously death is not a good way of farming gold no matter what farm you are doing. When I got this footage, my priest is actually level 58 that I am using in this footage, and I died twice in about a half an hour while I was farming here. Now, just to be clear, both of my deaths were because of my own stupidity and not because of anything else. But it is quite easy to die here. The technique that we are using, if you are a lower level, is quite challenging. So do expect a bit of a learning curve in terms of the correct options to pick when a situation goes wrong and you have to think on the fly. If you perform the technique that we're going to discuss correctly, hopefully you'll never need to learn not to do anything on the fly, but in my experience something always goes wrong and you will always have to be able to adapt. But without further ado, let's get into the technique itself. Now, the technique itself is going to revolve around use of the spell Mind Control. Now, Mind Control, if you are relatively appropriate level for this farm, is going to allow you to mind control and take the actions of an NPC character that is up to 3 levels higher than you. This is why you need to be level 50 at least, because the mobs that we're aiming to take over the mind of is going to be level 53 on average, and as a result you wouldn't be able to do this any lower. But what we're aiming to do is essentially find these packs of 2 mobs, or 2 individual mobs that are relatively nearby to each other, and use one of them to kill the other, while also allowing the one that we are mind controlling to get low on health, so that then when we've killed the other mob we're able to discontinue the mind control and finish that mob off as well. Now, this is a fantastic way of doing this because essentially you're never taking hits, so you're never going to really have to worry about healing up, and the mana usage is not that high either because you are going to be using the killing capabilities of the mob that you are controlling as opposed to yourself, so you're pretty much just going to use the mana required for your mind control spell. Now, there are lots of different mobs in Tyr's Hand, and this technique can work with absolutely any of the mobs in question, but there are definitely some that are better to mind control than others. Now, I'm going to talk about what happens when you mind control each of the mobs and the correct way of trying to do this, but we'll start with the optimal and work to the least optimal mobs to mind control. Now, The most optimal mob to mind control are these enchanters. Now these enchanters are going to be able to kill any of the other mobs relatively easily, irrespective of what mob type it is. They hit so hard, and it is also possible to use all of their mana while killing a mob, which means that when we disconnect our mind control and have to kill the enchanter itself, it has no mana to hit you, so it's essentially a caster that's hitting you with melee attacks, making it very weak and easy to finish off. This means that if you find a decent pack with an enchanter, you are usually able to kill the other mob in a few seconds and then only take 2 or 3 globals in order to be able to kill the enchanter afterwards. This is actually fantastic in terms of leveling. If you are able to kill these mobs efficiently, then this is actually a decent experience for you. This is primarily a gold farming video, but I did find that every mob that I was able to kill using a mind controlled mob would get me about 1000 experience. I am level 58 and it was rested, do bear that in mind, but 1000 experience a mob is absolutely ludicrous. Now, it is worth mentioning that any mob that you kill that you didn't kill entirely with the mind controlled mob, let's say for example you mind control 2 mobs, and you mind control a mob to fight the other mob, but then the mind control breaks when you are at, let's say, 20% HP, and then you finish off both of the mobs. The mob that you got to 20% HP and only did that last little bit on, you are only going to get an amount of experience roughly proportional to the percentage of the health that was left when you started to fight it, i.e. in that example you would get 20% experience for that mob. It is important to note that you would still get all of the drops from the mobs. However, if you are to mind control a mob, and the mob that you are fighting kills your mind controlled mob without you ever landing a hit after the mind control, then you will not get experience or loot from that mob. So that is the worst case scenario. We do not want the mob that we are mind controlling to die in our mind control. That is the worst case scenario. Now, as for what you're going to do with these mobs when you do take over their mind, you are going to use the enchanters. They have 2 abilities. First one is going to be this arcane missile effect, which is going to absolutely nuke any mob that you are trying to kill with it. This is very simple. All we're going to do, we're going to spam this ability until our opponent is dead. It is as easy as that. The second button we can practically ignore. It is a sleep crowd control effect. The only time I've ever found any use for this is if the mob that you are fighting is attempting to cast a heal. You can use this as a pseudo interrupt to prevent that heal and then just go back to killing with the arcane bolt spell that this character has. Now, you don't really need to care about what type of mob you are fighting when you have control of an enchanter, as it is basically just going to boil down to using your arcane bolts to kill the enemy and maybe use your sleep if it starts to heal. It doesn't really matter what type of mob it is. There's only 2 that have a healing effect and you would deal with it the same way. So the enchanter is, like I've alluded to, the very best mob to control. The next best mob that we can control is going to be the cleric. Now, the cleric is meant to be a bit like a shadow priest, and it has a mind blast effect as well as a heal. Now, the same premise applies. We're going to want to mind blast on our target until the target is dead or close to dead. We never want to heal if we can avoid it, because of course we are going to have to kill off the cleric that we have mind controlled, so it's much easier to do if it has 5% HP than 55% HP. And all you're going to want to do is just mind blast the target down, get it to low health, and then if your cleric is going to die, you want to end your mind control early. You can either create a macro for doing this, or simply just right click the mind control buff in the top right corner of your screen, and then the 2 mobs will aggro onto you. It is worth mentioning at this point that you will have so much threat. If you re-mind control a mob, you aren't going to get aggro back from the second mob. It will be hitting you, and that usually interrupts mind control, so it's very rare that re-mind controlling a mob in a fight is going to be worthwhile. The only way this is ever going to be worthwhile is if there is still just that one mob and you're looking to reposition into a new one. But I digress. Our third type of mob is going to be the warder. Now, the warder is sort of a paladin-esque mob and is by far the worst one to use your mind control on. This is because its 2 abilities are a heal that we're going to want to avoid using, and an ability that for some reason just hits like a wet noodle. It's supposed to increase the damage that it does to the target for each subsequent use. However, when using mind control, it just simply doesn't seem really to work. It never really seems to apply the debuff, and it just does pathetic damage. So you're pretty much just going to right click your target and let him auto attack until the target is dead. Now, the problem comes with warders in the fact that you aren't going to be able to kill a mob in the length of a mind control. Your best hope is that you're going to be able to get them low, that they will get you low, and then you'll have to finish them both off with Shadow of Pains or wands and kiting or whatever technique you prefer to use once that happens. Now, the real worst scenario is if you are to mind control a warder and then attempt to kill another warder. Essentially, at the end of your mind control, there's a very good chance that both mobs are going to have a lot of mana, end up healing each other, and probably only be at 50% health to begin with. So if you have any option with regards to the mobs available to you to include as a target or your mind controlled mob that you are using either a cleric or an enchanter, then I highly suggest that you do so. If you do have to go for a warder in a warder v warder situation, it is, in my opinion, generally the best option to only target the one that's going to block you, making a route to another mob, and then you can simply allow that warder to die in combat, get it very low, just worry about your mob that you've controlled dying. So you can often find where there's two mobs to go after your mind control mob. This is probably the way to go. End your mind control with the mob at 1% HP and just try and tag it, get the kill, run off and reset. Or, of course, you can attempt to just kill the mob outright. That's going to depend on your level, what one is the best way to go, but that is the best way to deal with an all-warder situation. The final point I want to make is that there are patrols in this area, but not that many, and they're very easy to spot. But one that's very noteworthy is a enchanter that is going to patrol up and down the outside main pathway to all of the buildings. He generally patrols from the gate to about where this sort of roundabout thing is in the middle of the town, and if you are able to use this enchanter to kill mobs at the side and then reset the enchanter by simply just running away, then you can continually use this enchanter to kill every mob around. It's a little bit tedious, a little bit difficult, you've got to have the space to be able to reset it, but if you can do that with how powerful enchanters are, I do recommend that you do it, because they are just going to terrorize absolutely any mob that is around that you want to kill. Now, as to the results that I found in my half an hour here, I did end up making about 100 gold. I did get very, very lucky with a couple of drops, most notably being some recipes that were going to be worth in and around between 20 to 50 gold, depending on the recipe in question, as well as also making a little bit of a dent into my next level. I made about 5% or so. Now, that is with rested experience, so it's of course not a fantastic return for half an hour's worth of play. However, it could have been a lot worse given that I didn't actually come here with a view to getting experience. So I wouldn't recommend this as an experience farm per se, because you're simply not going to be able to kill the mobs fast enough and efficiently enough to make it worthwhile. However, as far as an added perk while you're here gold farming, it's pretty fantastic. Well, that's going to about wrap it up for me today, guys. I do hope that you enjoyed the video. If you did, please do let me know down in the comments below, or if you have any questions, of course, feel free to ask them as well. If you'd like to be kept up to date with any future guides that I make that are a similar nature to this, then please do consider subscribing to the channel, and I hope to see you in the next one. Later!